I had been planning a solo camping trip for a while. Life in the city had been overwhelming. Constant noise, crowded subways, tight schedules. I needed a break. Not a weekend getaway with a group of friends. Not a hotel with amenities. Just me, the woods, and some peace. I looked up some state forests in the region and found a lesser-known one in northern Michigan. It didn't have much traffic, and the reviews were mostly from hunters and long-distance hikers. That sounded perfect to me. I packed up my old Jeep with the usual gear: a two-person tent, sleeping bag, water purification tablets, freeze-dried meals, bear spray, and a basic first aid kit. I also brought a small solar charger for my phone and GPS, but I didn't plan on using them much. My goal was to disconnect. I took a paper map from the ranger station just in case. I had picked a spot about 4 miles off the main forest road, close to a small creek. I figured it would give me clean water and good ground to set up my tent. The drive took most of the day. By the time I got to the trailhead, it was already late afternoon. I parked on a gravel pull-off and threw my pack over my shoulders. The air smelled like pine and damp earth. There was a slight chill even though it was early September. I hiked for about an hour before I found the spot I had marked. It was a flat clearing near the creek, surrounded by tall trees and thick underbrush. I dropped my pack, set up the tent, and boiled water for my first meal. That first night was peaceful. I sat near the fire, watched the flames dance, and let my mind settle. The woods were quiet except for the sounds of crickets and the occasional snap of a twig in the distance. I crawled into my sleeping bag and fell asleep to the soft gurgle of the creek. The next morning, I woke up early. The sun filtered through the tent walls, and the air was cold. I pulled on a sweatshirt and boiled water for instant coffee. After breakfast, I decided to do some exploring. I didn't plan to hike far, just wanted to stretch my legs and get a feel for the area. I followed the creek upstream, noting landmarks so I wouldn't get lost. A fallen tree covered in moss, a large boulder shaped like a wedge, and a fork in the stream. I was careful about time, and after a few hours, I made my way back to camp. Things were still quiet. Too quiet, maybe, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured I was just getting used to the solitude. I ate a light lunch and took a nap in the tent. When I woke up, the sun was lower than I expected. I had overslept a bit. I sat up and listened. No birds, no crickets, just the wind in the trees. It made the hair on my neck stand up. That evening, I gathered firewood from around the clearing and lit another fire. I didn't feel as relaxed as I had the first night. I kept looking over my shoulder. The fire helped a little, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I sat up for a while, poking at the fire and staring into the woods. I kept hearing faint snapping sounds, like someone stepping on dry twigs. I told myself it was deer, could have been a raccoon, anything but what my brain was starting to imagine. Around 10, I crawled into the tent and zipped it up. I left the rainfly open so I could see the stars. I lay there listening, waiting. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a noise, a dull thud, then another. It was coming from the direction of the creek. My heart started to race. I sat up slowly and listened hard. Nothing. I waited. Still nothing. Maybe a tree limb fell. I lay back down, but I didn't sleep well. The next morning, I found footprints. Not animal prints, boots. They were faint, and the ground was soft near the creek, but I could tell they weren't mine. I followed them for a few yards, then lost them in the underbrush. They had come from the opposite direction I had hiked the day before. Someone had been near my camp. I felt uneasy, but I tried to shake it off. Maybe a hunter had passed through. Still, I kept my bear spray on me the rest of the day. I didn't hike far. I stayed close to camp, collecting firewood and fishing a little in the creek. I barely caught anything. My head wasn't in it. That night, I decided to keep the fire going longer. I even made a perimeter with branches and some empty cans so I could hear if anything approached. Felt paranoid, but I needed something to give me peace of mind. I didn't sleep until well after 2. At around 4 in the morning, I woke up again. This time, I knew I had heard something. A crunch, then a shuffle. I sat up, heart pounding. I reached for my flashlight and quietly unzipped the tent. I aimed the beam toward the edge of the clearing. Nothing. I listened, barely breathing. Then I saw it, a figure, not an animal, person, standing near the tree line. They didn't move. They just stood there, barely visible in the dim light of the dying fire. I froze. I couldn't even think, just stared. Then they turned and walked into the woods. No flashlight, no sound, just vanished into the trees. I didn't sleep again that night. To first light, I packed everything up. Tent, food, gear, I shoved it all into my pack. I didn't even eat. I just wanted to get out. As I started down the trail, I kept checking behind me. I didn't hear or see anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Halfway back to the trailhead, I noticed something odd. One of the tree trunks had deep cuts in it. Not claw marks, knife marks, a bunch of them in the shape of an X. Below them was a pile of small bones, maybe squirrel or rabbit, and a plastic lighter. I kept moving. By the time I reached my Jeep, I was drenched in sweat, even though it was cold. I threw my gear into the back and locked the doors. As I drove away, I kept checking the rearview mirror. I didn't see anyone. The forest looked calm, but that didn't mean anything. When I got home, I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe it was a hiker or someone messing around. But the footprints, the figure at night, the bone pile, that wasn't normal. I still camp, but never alone anymore. And I never go back to that forest. Something wasn't right there. I'll never know what they wanted or if they meant harm, but I wasn't going to wait to find out. The trip was supposed to be about peace, about resetting. Instead, it made me realize how quickly things can turn. 1 minute you're soaking in silence, feeling free. The next, you're counting the miles to your car, praying nothing follows you out of those trees. And sometimes, late at night, I still see that figure, just standing there, watching. I've always liked the quiet. That's probably why I started camping alone. The silence out in the woods, with just the rustling leaves and the distant chirp of birds or crackling branches underfoot, always brought me a kind of peace I never got anywhere else. The kind you don't find in cities or even in the suburbs. So every few months, I'd load up my old SUV, drive hours out from the noise, and find a spot deep enough into the forest where I could forget about everything. The last trip I took was in the summer, mid-July. I remember the heat wave warnings that week, but I wasn't too worried. I had camped in worse. My plan was to drive about 5 hours northeast to a patch of woods just outside a national forest area. I'd found the spot a year before, marked it on my GPS. It wasn't on any official trail, but it was perfect. A clearing by a narrow creek, far from the main paths, with enough trees around that I felt hidden and safe. I packed for 4 days. I brought my tent, my knife, my stove, plenty of water, canned food, some trail mix, a couple of books, a tarp, a flashlight, batteries, a hatchet, and a small solar charger for emergencies. I had done this dozens of times. Nothing about it felt unusual. The drive was long but smooth. I took the back roads once I got closer to the forest, then a series of dirt roads until I reached the spot I usually parked at. From there, it was a hike, maybe an hour and a half through uneven ground and trees. I had my pack strapped tight, and I moved at a steady pace, stopping just once for water. When I reached the clearing, it looked just like I remembered. The grass was tall but dry, the creek running slow but steady. I set up camp fast, getting my tent up and my tarp strung between 2 trees so I'd have shade. I got a fire pit cleared out, though I didn't light a fire yet because it was still light out. That first night, I cooked some beans on the stove, ate by the edge of the creek, and read a little. The sun dipped down, and the woods turned orange before the dark rolled in. I didn't hear anything strange, just bugs and frogs. I zipped up my tent and slept deep and dreamless. The second day was hotter. I woke up sweating and stripped down to my shorts. I rinsed off in the creek, icy cold even in the summer, and decided to hike around a bit. I brought a day pack with water and a whistle, and I marked a few trees with ribbons just in case. It was mostly downhill to the west, but I climbed back up around noon and spent the rest of the afternoon back at camp. That night, I fell asleep quicker, probably from the heat and walking. On the third day, things started to feel off. It wasn't anything loud or dramatic, just small things. When I woke up, I noticed the tarp was lower on one side, like one of the knots had come undone. I figured maybe it was the wind, though there wasn't much of a breeze. I retied it tighter. I also saw something strange by the creek. There were boot prints, fresh ones, leading down to the water and then away. They weren't mine. I always walked with hiking shoes that had a distinct pattern. These looked like plain rubber soles. I crouched and studied them for a while. They weren't deep, but they were clear. It bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I hadn't seen or heard anyone nearby. I tried to tell myself maybe a ranger or hunter passed through, though this area was well off any posted trails. Still, I didn't want to panic. I checked my stuff. Nothing was taken or moved. The tent was untouched. Food was still sealed up. Maybe I was just being paranoid. That night, I couldn't sleep as well. I kept thinking about the prints. I thought I heard something at one point, crunching leaves or twigs snapping. But when I sat up and listened, everything went quiet. I shined my flashlight around but didn't see anything. The next morning, I made a decision to cut the trip short. I still had food and water, but I just didn't feel comfortable anymore. I started packing up around 7 a.m., folding the tarp and breaking down the tent. I had maybe 2 hours of work left. That's when I noticed something worse. My footprints, the ones leading to and from the creek, were mixed in with another set. The same rubber sole prints. They were closer now, just a few feet from where I'd been sleeping. The tracks circled my tent, twice. Then they led off into the woods. I froze. I stood completely still for maybe a full minute. The birds were quiet. My skin was damp with sweat that wasn't from the heat. Someone had come into my camp while I was sleeping. Someone had walked around my tent. I packed faster. I didn't stop to eat. I didn't even fully fold the tent, just stuffed it down. Every few seconds, I'd glance up, scanning the trees. I didn't see anyone, but the feeling in my chest told me I wasn't alone. I couldn't explain it, just the sense that eyes were on me. When I started hiking out, I walked faster than usual. I had a long way to go, and I didn't want to stop. Every few minutes, I'd pause and listen. I thought I heard footsteps once, but they were faint. I told myself it was probably an animal. I made it back to the car by noon. The SUV was just how I left it. I threw my pack into the back and slammed the door. I locked all the doors before I even started the engine. The drive back was nerve-wracking. I kept checking the rearview mirror. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had followed me. I didn't stop until I hit a gas station about an hour away from the woods. I went inside, used the bathroom, got a bottle of water, and sat in the parking lot for a while. When I got home, I checked all the locks. I took a long shower and sat in the living room with the TV on, even though I wasn't watching anything. I didn't sleep much that night. Over the next few days, I kept thinking back. The footprints, the silence, the sense of being watched. I went back and looked at my gear. Everything was still there. I didn't find any markings or anything taken. But the thought that someone had been out there, just watching me sleep, walking around my camp, maybe even waiting for me to leave, it stuck with me. I haven't gone camping alone since. I still think about that trip, especially at night. How quiet it got. How I never saw anyone, but I knew someone had been there. Someone had followed my trail. Someone had gotten close enough to touch my tent. I never saw a face, never heard a voice, but they were there, and that's what scared me the most. Not what I saw, but what I didn't. I've gone camping again, but only with friends and never in the same place. I don't stray off trails anymore. I keep my phone charged and within reach. I listen more. I trust my gut. That trip reminded me that the woods aren't empty. Just because you don't see anyone doesn't mean you're alone. And now I never assume I am. I went camping alone in the summer of 2022. I had just finished a rough stretch at work and needed to get away from everything. I didn't want to go anywhere too crowded, so I picked a small, lesser-known national forest in northern Idaho. I found it by looking through satellite maps, picking a place that was far from cities and even far from the more popular campgrounds. There was a dirt road that snaked off a county highway for several miles into the forest. It had some pull-off clearings near a river. I packed up my gear, filled up the tank, and drove out there on a Friday morning. The drive-in was long and dusty. After I turned off the main road, I drove for almost an hour down that uneven dirt trail. I didn't see a single other car. The trees grew thicker the farther in I got. Pines and spruce mostly, tall and quiet. The air smelled fresh and clean, and I rolled down the windows just to breathe it all in. Felt peaceful. Felt right. When I finally found the spot I'd marked on the map, I pulled over into a clearing that was maybe 30 yards wide. The river was about 50 feet downhill through a patch of brush and trees. I could hear it from the clearing, the steady sound of running water. Parked, stretched, and looked around. No sign that anyone had camped there recently. That was good. I liked it that way. I set up my tent near the edge of the clearing where the ground was the flattest. I brought a folding chair, a cooler, my small propane stove, and a pile of dry firewood I'd picked up earlier. I had a book, a fishing rod, and no cell signal. That was how I wanted it. The first day went great. I fished for a bit, caught nothing, but the river was beautiful. I made dinner, read by the fire, and then crawled into my tent and slept well. The second day started the same way. I woke up early, stretched, boiled water for coffee. I walked around a bit, explored the brush near the river. I saw some old animal tracks, maybe a deer or elk. No bear prints. That was a relief. I kept a can of bear spray on my hip just in case, but I hadn't seen any signs of anything big. That afternoon, I decided to follow the river upstream. I brought a small day pack with snacks, water, and my knife. I walked slowly, stopping now and then to look at animal signs or weird rocks. The forest was thick but not hard to move through. I followed the river for over an hour. At one point, I found what looked like an old fire ring, long and used. There was blackened rock and broken sticks in a small circle. Maybe a hunter or another camper from years ago. I didn't think much of it. I turned back before it got late and returned to camp. I made dinner, sat by the fire, and listened to the wind in the trees. I thought I heard something moving in the brush once, but when I turned and looked, there was nothing. Could have been a raccoon or a squirrel. That night, though, I woke up to a sound. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. It was a snap, like a twig breaking. I opened my eyes, heart beating faster. It was dark in the tent, and my ears strained. Another soft sound. Footsteps, light but deliberate. Not a deer, not a bear. I reached for my flashlight and slowly unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The moon gave enough light to see the clearing. Nothing moved. I sat there for a while, listening. I didn't hear anything else. Eventually, I zipped up the tent and lay back down, though I didn't fall asleep for a long time. The next morning, I got up early, feeling a little on edge. I walked around the clearing, looking for prints. I found a few spots where the pine needles looked disturbed, like someone stepped there, but no clear boot prints. Couldn't be sure. I told myself it was probably an animal. Maybe a deer, maybe a coyote. Something that passed through. I tried to enjoy the day, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It felt like something was off, but I couldn't explain why. Later that afternoon, I went back down to the river. I was crouched down filling up my water bottle when I noticed something across the river, maybe 40 feet away on the other side. A shape, dark and still. I froze. It was a person, a man standing behind a tree, not fully hidden but not exposed either. He wasn't moving, just standing. I stared, not knowing what to do. I raised my hands slowly, pretending like I hadn't seen him. I finished filling the bottle, stood, and walked calmly back up to camp. I didn't run. I didn't want to make it a chase. Back at camp, I didn't see or hear anything. I packed up a few essentials, knife, flashlight, food, and kept them close. I didn't know if that man had followed me or was just passing through, but it felt wrong. He didn't wave. He didn't speak. Just stood there, watching. That night, I barely slept. I kept the flashlight in one hand and the knife in the other. I didn't hear anything, but I kept imagining footsteps, twigs snapping, shadows moving outside the tent. It was the longest night I'd ever had. By morning, I had made up my mind to leave. I packed up quickly. The sun wasn't fully up when I zipped the last bag and loaded everything into the car. I felt like someone was watching me the whole time. The trees seemed too quiet. As I started driving back down the dirt road, I kept checking the rearview mirror. After a couple miles, I saw something that made me slow down. A large branch had been dragged into the middle of the road. I hadn't seen it on the way in. It was too big to drive over. I stopped, got out, and dragged it to the side. As I did, I saw footprints in the dust. 2 sets. Both looked fresh. One set came from the woods on the left, the other from the right. They met at the road. I didn't wait to think about it. I got back in the car and drove fast, tires kicking up dirt behind me. I didn't stop until I hit the highway. I didn't stop for food. I didn't stop for gas until I was 2 hours away. When I got home, I double-checked all my locks. I took a long shower and tried to calm down. I didn't tell anyone what happened for a few days. I couldn't even explain it to myself. It wasn't a ghost or a monster. It was people. Someone was out there, watching, maybe waiting, maybe playing a game. I don't know what would have happened if I stayed another night. I don't want to know. I still go camping, but never alone, and never without letting someone know exactly where I'm going. That trip reminded me that sometimes the scariest thing in the woods isn't the animals or the weather. It's people. I had been planning the camping trip for a few weeks. It was the middle of September, that time of year when the air starts getting crisp and the leaves haven't quite turned yet. I needed a break from work and the constant noise of city life. I wanted somewhere remote but not too far from civilization, just far enough to feel alone and quiet. I picked a forested area in northern Oregon. It wasn't a designated campground, more like a dispersed camping zone a couple of miles down a fire road that few people used. I had gone there once before, about 3 years ago, and remembered it being peaceful, empty, and covered in tall pines. I packed everything the night before: my tent, sleeping bag, a small stove, fuel, 2 flashlights with extra batteries, water filter, dry food for 4 days, a bear canister, a knife, and a hand crank radio. I didn't bring a gun. I didn't think I'd need it. I had bear spray. I'd be alone, so I also brought a personal locator beacon just in case. I drove out on a Thursday morning. The roads got narrower and bumpier as I neared the forest. Eventually, I was crawling along at 5 miles per hour down the fire road. It had rained a couple days earlier, so the dirt was soft and damp but not muddy. After about 2 miles in, I pulled off where the road widened a bit, enough for me to park my car just off the edge. I turned off the engine, sat there for a minute, and listened. No wind, no birds, just stillness. I stepped out and took a deep breath. That forest smell hit me immediately. Damp pine, moss, a faint earthy scent of decomposing leaves. I grabbed my gear and walked about 300 feet into the trees where the slope flattened out. I found a small clearing just big enough for my tent and a bit of a cooking area. I set up camp slowly, making sure everything was done properly. The tent went up first. Then I found a tree branch about 10 feet off the ground to hang my bear canister. I set up my cooking spot about 100 feet away from the tent. I didn't want to attract anything too close. I filtered some water from a small stream I had passed on the way in. After dinner, just some rice and canned chicken. I sat on a log and listened. That was the part one had been missing in the city. Silence. Not the kind of silence you get in your room, but the deep kind where the world seems to exhale and you hear your own breath. That first night went quietly. It got cold, probably in the low 40s, but I was wrapped up well. I heard some distant rustling just before I fell asleep, but chalked it up to raccoons or deer. I woke up with the sun and felt refreshed. I made some oatmeal and coffee, then hiked around for a while. The trees were tall and packed tight in some spots, but every now and then there'd be a break where you could see the sky. I didn't see anyone. No tire tracks, no boot prints. It was like I had the entire forest to myself. Around midday, I started feeling a little uneasy. It wasn't anything specific, just a tight feeling in my chest, like I was being watched. I chalked it up to being alone in the woods for too long. It happens sometimes. Your brain starts playing games. I kept hiking and tried to shake it off. I found a patch of mushrooms I didn't recognize and made a mental note to look them up later. By early afternoon, I was back at camp. I filtered more water, ate some jerky and granola, and then laid in the sun for a while. That second night, something changed. I went to bed around 9. It was colder, so I wore extra layers. I fell asleep quickly, but something woke me up. It was still pitch black, and the moon must have been covered by clouds. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. I lay there for a second, trying to figure out what had snapped me awake. Then I heard it, footsteps. Not animal movement, not four-legged padding. These were slow, careful footsteps. 2 feet. I held my breath. The steps circled the tent once. Then again. They were close, maybe 2 feet from the nylon. I stayed still, not even blinking. The steps stopped near the front of the tent. Then nothing. No sound. I waited for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 10 minutes. Eventually, I reached slowly for my flashlight and clicked it on. I didn't unzip the tent. I just shined the beam around inside. Everything looked normal, but I knew what I had heard. The next morning, I checked outside. No prints. The ground was covered in pine needles, soft and bouncy, not good for holding impressions. I scanned the area but didn't see anything out of place. No trash disturbed, no gear moved. Still, something felt off. I thought about leaving, but I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe I had dreamed it. I tried to convince myself of that. I didn't hike far that day. I stayed close to camp and gathered more water and firewood. I built a fire that night just for comfort. Around midnight, I heard it again. This time, it started with branches snapping in the distance. Not wind, not small cracks. These were heavy. Then I heard breathing, low and deep, like someone trying to be quiet but failing. I grabbed the knife and flashlight. I didn't leave the tent. The sounds got closer, then stopped. Then I heard metal, a clink, like someone brushing against my cook pot or stove. I waited, heart pounding. Then nothing. No more movement. I didn't sleep again that night. By morning, I had made up my mind. I was packing up and getting out. I stepped out into the gray light and immediately saw something that made my stomach turn. My bare canister was gone. The rope had been cut. Not chewed, cut. Clean, straight. I found the canister about 20 feet away, on its side, unopened. I didn't keep anything important in it overnight, but the fact that someone had deliberately taken it down freaked me out. I packed everything as fast as I could and headed back toward the car. I kept checking behind me. I heard small sounds, twigs snapping, rustling, but never saw anything. The forest felt different, not quiet anymore, heavy, like it was pushing against me. It took me almost an hour to reach the fire road. I was about 50 feet from where I had parked when I stopped dead. My car wasn't there. I knew exactly where I left it. There was a slight slope and a big tree to the right, but the space was empty. I felt dizzy. I walked in circles, retraced my steps, looked for any sign. I finally found the tire marks. They led back up the road, heading out. Someone had taken my car. I was 12 miles from the nearest main road. I didn't have cell service. I stood there, in the middle of the forest, feeling panic slowly spread through me. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just turned and started walking. I followed the fire road, moving fast, trying not to think. Every noise made me jump. Birds flying off, squirrels darting. I kept going for hours. I took short breaks but didn't stop long. Around late afternoon, I heard an engine. I stepped into the trees and crouched low. A truck rolled past, green, older model, maybe 90s. 2 men in it. I didn't recognize them. They weren't rangers. They weren't from any service I could tell. I stayed hidden. Once they were gone, I waited 10 more minutes before I started walking again. I didn't want to risk being seen. By dusk, I reached a turnoff where the fire road met a paved one. I waited. After another hour, a car finally came by. I flagged them down. It was an older couple heading home from fishing. They gave me a ride to the nearest town. I didn't tell them everything, just that I'd been camping and my car was stolen. They called the sheriff for me. It took 2 days for them to find my car. It had been left in a gravel turnout about 20 miles from where I parked it. Nothing was stolen. The doors were locked. The keys were gone. No fingerprints. No damage. Just moved. Like someone wanted to strand me. The ranger I spoke with said he hadn't heard of anything similar in the area. I filed a report. They told me they'd investigate, but I never heard anything else. I never went back to that part of the forest. I still camp, but I stick to places with other people nearby. I carry a satellite phone now, and a firearm. I'll never forget that feeling. The slow realization that someone was out there, watching me, moving around my camp, touching my gear, not trying to rob me, not trying to hurt me, just letting me know I wasn't alone, and that they could get closer anytime they wanted. I went camping alone in the summer of 2021. I was 29 at the time, and I'd been wanting to spend some time away from the noise of everything. I had some vacation days stacked up, and I didn't feel like sitting around the house wasting them. I liked the idea of being alone in the woods, just me and the trees. I didn't want anything fancy, just a break from people and city noise. I picked a spot in northern Washington, near a remote area by the Cascades, not too far from the Canadian border. I found it by looking through forums and reading reviews from solo hikers. Most of them said it was peaceful, quiet, and safe if you were experienced and prepared. I wasn't an expert survivalist or anything, but I had done enough hiking and solo trips to know what I was doing. I brought everything I needed: a good tent, sleeping bag, food, a bear canister, water filter, first aid kit, a satellite phone, and even a flare just in case. I hiked in about 10 miles from the nearest dirt road. The trail was well marked at first, but after about 7 miles, it started getting faint. It wasn't completely gone, but it was clear not many people came out this far. That's what I wanted. When I got to the spot I had picked out, just a clearing beside a small creek, I set up camp. There were tall pines around the edge and a small rise of boulders nearby that gave me a view of the forest stretching out in all directions. It was quiet except for the running water and birds. No motor sounds, no planes, no voices. I liked that. The first 2 days were peaceful. I walked the area, took pictures, wrote in my notebook, and just sat by the creek. I cooked simple meals over my little camp stove, cleaned up everything, and kept my food sealed tight. I saw a few deer from a distance. I didn't see any other people, no footprints, no trash, nothing. On the third day, I woke up around dawn. I got out of the tent, stretched, and walked over to the creek to splash some water on my face. That's when I saw it, boot prints in the dirt on the edge of the creek. They weren't mine. They were bigger than mine and deeper, like whoever made them was heavier or carrying something heavy. The prints came from the woods, stopped at the creek, then went back into the woods. I stared at them for a while, trying to make sense of it. They weren't there the night before. I had walked this spot plenty of times. I would have seen them. I looked around but didn't see anyone. I called out even though I didn't want to. No one answered. I felt uneasy, but I told myself it was fine. Maybe someone passed by early and left. I packed my gear neatly, just in case I had to move, and stayed close to camp for the day. That night, I stayed up longer than usual. I kept my light off and sat in the dark, listening. Around midnight, I heard something. It wasn't an animal. It was steady footsteps, crunch, crunch, crunch. They were far off but clear. Someone was walking through the woods. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The footsteps got closer, then stopped. I couldn't see anything. Then they started again, going away. I didn't sleep much. In the morning, I packed up quickly. I didn't want to run, but I wanted to move. I hiked further up the ridge, away from the creek, and set up camp near some rocks that gave me a view of the trail below. I stayed low, quiet, made no fire, and ate cold food. That night, I heard nothing. But in the morning, I found something that made my stomach twist. Tied to a tree near my tent was a piece of red cloth. It wasn't mine. It was knotted tight to a low branch eye level, like someone left it there. I looked around again, saw nothing, heard nothing. I grabbed it, stuffed it in my pack, and decided to head back to the car. The hike back was slow because I kept checking behind me. I felt watched the whole time. I didn't see anyone, but I kept thinking I heard someone just behind the trees. I stopped twice and waited to hear more, but it would go quiet each time. When I finally got to my car, I saw something else that chilled me. On my windshield, under the wiper, was another piece of red cloth, just like the one by the tent. My car had been untouched otherwise. No windows broken.
No scratches.
Just the cloth. I didn't waste any time. I drove straight out of there, down the forest roads, onto the highway, and didn't stop until I was halfway home. That night, I kept the lights on and checked the locks more than once. In the following days, I kept thinking about it. I checked online forums, searched local news, but didn't find anything. No missing persons, no strange reports. I didn't want to go to the police because technically nothing happened. I hadn't seen anyone, and no crime had been committed. But I knew someone had followed me. Someone had been out there watching. The worst part was the feeling. It wasn't like being scared of a bear or a storm. It was the feeling of being hunted, slowly, quietly, by someone who didn't want to be seen. Someone who waited until I was alone. I don't know what they wanted. Maybe just to scare me. Maybe something worse. I haven't gone camping alone since then. I still hike, but only on busy trails and never more than a few miles in. I tell people where I'm going, and I carry more than just a flare now. Sometimes I still think about those footsteps at night and that second piece of red cloth on my car. That trip was supposed to be peaceful, a break from everything, but instead, it showed me how close danger can be, even when you think you're alone, especially when you think you're alone. I decided to go camping by myself in early October, just as the leaves were starting to change and the crowds began to die down. I wanted peace and quiet, away from the city noise, away from my phone, away from everything. I picked a state forest in the Northeast, the kind of place where people only go for hunting or deep woods hiking. It wasn't a national park, so there were no real campgrounds with rangers or fire pits. You just hiked in, set up camp, and did your best to leave no trace. I parked my car in a dirt lot that was barely more than a clearing and locked everything up. I strapped my big hiking backpack on, which held a small tent, my sleeping bag, freeze-dried food, a water filter, and all the essentials. The plan was to hike around 5 miles into the woods and find a good flat spot to set up for a couple of nights. The trail started out pretty easy. The weather was perfect, cool and crisp, not too hot and not freezing yet. Birds were chirping, the breeze was moving through the trees, and dry leaves crunched under my boots. Felt good. I followed the trail deeper, using a topographic map and compass to track where I was. I'd done this kind of thing a dozen times before. I wasn't worried about getting lost. After about 4 hours of steady hiking, I found a nice spot on a slight ridge overlooking a stream. The land was level enough, and there were no dead trees nearby that could fall on me if the wind picked up. I cleared a spot, pitched the tent, and set up a small area for cooking away from the tent. I always follow safety guidelines, especially with bears in the area. That first night was peaceful. I boiled water, ate my food, and sat watching the stars come out. The forest was quiet, aside from the usual sounds of insects and the occasional owl. I slept pretty well, only waking up once or twice when I thought I heard something walking in the distance, probably a deer. The next day, I hiked out a little farther with just a day pack. I didn't go far, maybe 2 miles beyond camp. I followed the stream and just took in the scenery. No one else around, no trash, no voices, nothing. It was exactly what I came for. That night, things felt different. It was colder, windier. The forest didn't seem quite as still. I heard more noises, more crunching of leaves. At first, I chalked it up to the wind or animals, but the sounds were too regular. Footsteps, almost, but they would stop when I got out of the tent with my headlamp. I told myself it was my imagination, that maybe a raccoon or two were prowling around, or maybe a porcupine. I stayed alert but didn't panic. I didn't see anything out of place in the morning. On the third day, I decided to start packing up slowly. I had enough food and energy to stay one more night, but something about the area was starting to put me on edge. I couldn't explain it. It wasn't anything obvious, just a feeling that I wasn't alone out there. Midway through the afternoon, I heard something that made my stomach turn. I was filtering water at the stream, crouched down, when I heard movement behind me. I stood up fast and spun around, but no one was there. Still, something had definitely been behind me. Twigs snapping, leaves crunching. I stared into the trees for a while but saw nothing. Then I noticed something near my camp when I got back. My backpack, which I had zipped up tight and left hanging on a low tree branch, was on the ground, open. Nothing was missing, but it had clearly been opened. Zippers don't undo themselves. I looked around for any signs of paw prints, claw marks, anything that might suggest a bear or raccoon, but found none. It didn't make sense. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing those same slow footsteps circling the tent. They would come and go. A few steps, a pause, a few more steps. I kept unzipping the tent to flash my light outside but saw nothing. No eyes reflecting, no movement, just darkness. Around 3 a.m., I finally drifted off, only to be jolted awake about an hour later by a loud noise. It was like something had slammed against the tree I had hung my food from. I scrambled out of the tent with my knife and flashlight, heart pounding, and found the food bag still hanging. But the tree bark had fresh scratches on it. Deep, vertical ones. They weren't from a bear. I've seen what bear scratches look like. These were more like someone had used a knife. That was it for me. As soon as the sun started to come up, I packed up my gear as fast as I could. I didn't even eat breakfast. I hiked out faster than I'd ever hiked before, checking behind me every few minutes. I had this awful feeling I was being watched, that I had been watched since I got there. When I finally reached the car and got inside, I locked the doors and just sat there shaking. I drove straight home, heart racing the whole way. A few days later, I looked up some news articles and backcountry reports from that forest. I didn't find much, but there were a few mentions of missing hikers over the years. Nothing recent, nothing confirmed, but enough to make me wonder. I still go camping, but never alone now, and never that deep in, because I know someone else was out there, and I have no idea what they wanted. But I know they were watching me, and I don't think I was supposed to see the signs, not and make it out. It started as a weekend trip to clear my head. I'd been working nonstop, barely sleeping, eating takeout almost every day. My eyes were strained from staring at screens too long, and I just needed to unplug. I didn't want to go to a crowded campground or a national park where people would be parked in RVs next to each other. I needed something quiet, away from everything. So I picked a remote camping area I found online, tucked into a forested patch of land a few hours from home. It wasn't listed on most travel sites. It wasn't popular. That was exactly why I picked it. I loaded my gear into the car early Friday morning. Tent, sleeping bag, food for 3 days, a water jug, a small stove, bear spray, extra socks, and a couple of books I hadn't touched in months. My phone stayed on airplane mode from the moment I pulled out of the driveway. The drive was quiet. I took side roads for the last stretch, winding through dense forest that seemed to swallow the pavement. The last 10 miles were on a dirt road, and I didn't pass a single car. By the time I reached the campsite, the sun had started to dip. The place wasn't developed, no marked spots, no bathrooms, just a clearing near a small creek. I parked, stretched my legs, and started setting up the tent. The air smelled clean, like pine and wet soil. Everything was quiet except for the trickle of the creek and the occasional chirp of a bird. Once the tent was up, I boiled some water for a dehydrated meal, ate while sitting on a log, and watched the last of the daylight fade behind the trees. That night, I fell asleep faster than I had in months. The cool air, the silence, the absence of phone screens, it all helped. I remember waking up once in the middle of the night to pee. The moon was out, making everything glow slightly. I stood outside for a few minutes afterward, just breathing in the night air, then crawled back into my sleeping bag. The next morning, I made instant coffee, ate a protein bar, and walked down to the creek. I followed it upstream for about a mile, snapping some photos with my old camera. I saw deer tracks, a few birds, even a fox that darted out of the underbrush before disappearing again. Around noon, I returned to camp, made lunch, and lay on the ground staring up at the sky. I dozed off at some point, waking up in the late afternoon. That's when I noticed something odd. It was subtle at first. My tent flap, which I'd zipped shut before leaving to hike, was open, just slightly, like someone had tugged it and stopped. I didn't think much of it. Maybe I hadn't zipped it all the way, or maybe a breeze had pulled it loose. I zipped it up again and checked to make sure nothing inside was missing. Everything looked untouched. My sleeping bag, my pack, the small food bag I kept sealed in a plastic bin. Still, I felt unsettled. I hadn't seen a single person since I turned off the main road. No cars, no tire tracks, no voices in the distance. Just forest. That night, I built a small fire. I hadn't planned on it, but I wanted the light. I didn't even cook anything over it. I just sat close to the flames, sipping hot water, listening. The woods felt different. Not louder, just stiller, like everything was waiting. The hairs on my arms stood up, and I kept glancing over my shoulder. But nothing happened. No sounds, no movement. Eventually, I put out the fire and went into the tent, but I left the zipper halfway down so I could listen better. I lay awake for a long time. Every twig snap made me tense up. Every gust of wind brushing against the tent felt deliberate. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, but something about that open flap kept looping in my head. Around 2 a.m., I finally drifted off. The next morning, I woke up to find the zipper on the tent wide open. Not halfway, not tugged. Fully down, the flap pulled back neatly. I sat up fast, heart racing, and grabbed my flashlight even though it was daylight. I looked around outside. Nothing seemed different. No footprints, no signs of animals. But something had been there. I packed up my gear into the plastic bin and dragged it closer to the tent. I didn't want to leave things out. I boiled water for coffee and tried to calm down, but I couldn't shake the tension in my shoulders. My gut told me someone had been in camp. Not an animal. Someone. I considered leaving, but part of me didn't want to overreact. I was in the middle of nowhere. If I packed up now, I'd be wasting the whole weekend. I told myself I'd stay one more night. I'd keep the tent zipped tight, leave the flashlight within reach, and stay awake if I had to. Around sunset, I heard something. It was faint, like a soft thud in the distance. Then another. I stood still, listening. It didn't come again. I walked a slow circle around the camp, checking the trees, the underbrush. Nothing. No movement, no sound. Just the fading light and the buzz of insects. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the tent with my flashlight on, pointed toward the zipper. I kept the bear spray in one hand, finger on the trigger. Hours passed. At one point, I heard leaves crunch. Just once. But I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Nothing followed. When the sun came up, I got out and packed everything. I didn't make breakfast. I didn't change clothes. I just shoved everything into the car and started driving. I felt like I was being watched the whole time. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel. I didn't stop until I hit the highway. Back home, I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe a raccoon had figured out the zipper. But deep down, I didn't believe that. A week later, I checked the SD card from my camera. I'd taken dozens of photos on the hike. Trees, water, birds, normal stuff. Then, toward the end, I found one I didn't remember taking. It was of my tent, taken from behind a tree. The angle was low, like someone had crouched and aimed the camera at camp. The photo was slightly blurry, like the camera had been moved quickly. My stomach dropped. I hadn't taken that picture. I deleted the entire SD card, reformatted it, and haven't gone camping alone since. I still go outdoors, but only in places with people around. And even then, I keep my tent zipped tight, my flashlight close, and my ears open all night. Something was out there that weekend, and it wasn't an animal. It was someone who knew I was alone. Someone who watched me, maybe from the woods, maybe from behind a tree. Someone who came into my tent twice and left without taking anything, just reminding me they were there. I try not to think about what might have happened if I'd stayed one more night. I went camping alone last fall in a remote part of northern Oregon. I'm in my late 30s, and I've always enjoyed long solo camping trips. Something about being out in the quiet woods, miles away from anyone, always helped me clear my head. That year had been hard on me. I'd lost my job in March, my long-term relationship ended in May, and I'd been dealing with a lot of anxiety and stress. I figured a week alone in the woods would help me reset. I packed my truck with everything I needed: tent, sleeping bag, a cooler of food, portable stove, some emergency supplies, and set out for a spot I'd found on an old hiking forum. It wasn't an official campsite, just a clearing near a small river about 12 miles down a rough Forest Service road. I reached the spot after 3 hours of slow driving and parked the truck just off the road. It was late afternoon. I set up my tent about 20 yards from the river, close enough to hear the water flowing but far enough that I wouldn't get soaked if it rained. The clearing was surrounded by tall pines and thick underbrush. There was no cell signal at all, and I hadn't seen another person or vehicle since leaving the main road. It was exactly what I'd been hoping for. The first night was peaceful. I made a fire, cooked some canned chili, and sat by the flames watching the stars. It got cold fast after sunset, but I was ready for that. I turned in early, read a few chapters from a paperback by flashlight, and then drifted off to sleep with the sound of the river in the background. The next morning, I made some coffee and oatmeal, then spent the day exploring the area. I followed the river for a few miles upstream, climbed over rocks, crossed fallen logs, and took photos of deer tracks and small birds I couldn't name. It felt good to move, breathe clean air, and be away from the constant noise of everyday life. By the third night, I was settled in. That evening, I heard something strange. It was just after sunset, and I was sitting near the fire again when I heard a loud cracking sound in the woods behind my tent. It was the kind of sound a big branch makes when it snaps, but it didn't stop. There were more cracks, some rustling, then silence. I stood still for a while, staring into the darkness, thinking it might be a deer. After 10 minutes with no more noise, I sat back down. I didn't hear anything else the rest of the night, and I tried to tell myself it was nothing. The next morning, I walked in the direction of the sounds from the night before. I didn't see any animal tracks, but I did notice that a few branches on a nearby pine tree were broken, about 6 feet off the ground. They weren't old breaks either. Fresh, green pine needles still clung to the splintered ends. That made me uneasy. Deer don't usually break branches like that, and black bears don't climb pine trees unless they have a reason. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I backed off and spent the day fishing downstream. Still, I kept looking over my shoulder every few minutes. That night, I didn't light a fire. I ate cold beans from a can and went to bed early. I kept my hatchet close by just in case. The woods were dead silent, more than usual. No crickets, no wind. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a loud thud outside the tent. I froze. It was pitch black. The sound had come from maybe 10 feet away. I waited. A minute later, there was another sound. Slow, heavy footsteps, moving away. I didn't dare unzip the tent. I just sat there, barely breathing until the sounds were gone. It took me an hour to fall back asleep. At dawn, I came out to find the cooler had been moved. Not opened, just moved a few feet from where I left it. There were no bite marks or scratches, just moved. That unsettled me more than anything else. It felt deliberate. I thought about packing up and leaving, but I still had 2 days left, and I didn't want to let fear ruin the trip. I spent the day carving a long walking stick and collecting firewood. I set up some tripwires using fishing line around the tent area, just to give myself a warning if anything came too close. That evening, I built a fire and tried to act normal. I forced myself to eat a proper meal and listen to a podcast I downloaded before the trip. The fire helped. I started to relax again, but just after midnight, I heard the tripwire snap. A light pop, then silence. I sat up in the tent, heart pounding. I grabbed the flashlight and unzipped the flap just enough to peek out. I couldn't see anything at first. Then I noticed movement in the trees. Something big, walking upright, maybe 30 feet away. It wasn't making any noise now. It just moved behind a tree and stayed there. I stayed still for what felt like an hour, flashlight off, straining to hear or see anything else. Eventually, I must have dozed off because I woke up to daylight. When I got out of the tent, I checked the tripwire. It had been tripped, all right. One end was still tied to a tree, the other broken. There were large footprints in the dirt. Human, barefoot. The prints were wide, the toes clearly visible in the soft soil. That was it. I packed everything up. I didn't even eat breakfast. I hiked back to the truck in under an hour, checking behind me the whole time. When I finally got to the truck and locked the doors, I sat there shaking for a while. I didn't see anything else on the drive back to the main road, and I didn't stop until I got to a gas station with other people around. I didn't report it. What would I say? I wasn't hurt. Nothing was stolen. But someone or something had been out there with me, watching me, testing boundaries. Since then, I haven't gone camping alone. I still think about that trip all the time. The way the woods went quiet, the feeling of being watched, the footprints. Whoever it was never hurt me, but they could have. They were close enough. They knew where I was. They waited until dark. That's the part that gets to me. It wasn't an accident. They knew what they were doing. That's what makes it worse. It was real, and I'll never go that deep into the woods alone again. I don't usually go camping alone, not because I'm scared of being out there by myself, but because it's not really fun without someone else. But after a rough few months, losing my job, breaking up with someone I thought I'd be with for years, I just needed to get away. I packed my old gear, dusted off the tent I hadn't used in forever, and headed toward a remote spot in the mountains I remembered visiting as a kid with my dad. It wasn't part of a maintained campground. No ranger station, no bathrooms, just trees, rock, and silence. I drove for hours into the backcountry, the kind of place where dirt roads aren't really roads anymore, just narrow trails barely wide enough for a single vehicle. My old SUV shook and groaned as I pushed through ruts and dodged fallen branches. The deeper I went, the more alone I felt. No service bars on my phone. No signs of other campers. That's what I wanted. I found a clearing next to a small creek, backed by thick pine trees, with a slope leading up to a granite ridge. The air smelled clean. The sun was starting to drop, casting long shadows through the trees. I set up my tent just before it got dark. I got a fire going with some trouble. My hands were stiff from the cold, but the fire helped. I cooked a can of chili and ate it right out of the pot. I hadn't brought much, some canned stuff, trail mix, a flask of whiskey. I didn't plan to stay long. Maybe 2 nights, just enough to clear my head. I sat by the fire until the stars came out, then crawled into my sleeping bag. The first night wasn't too bad. The sounds of the woods were louder than I remembered. Frogs near the creek, the rustle of wind through dry leaves, branches snapping occasionally, probably from animals. I didn't sleep great, but I never do the first night camping. It always takes me a while to settle in. The next morning, I woke up early, stiff and cold. I boiled water for instant coffee and took a short hike uphill to get a better view. From the top of the ridge, I could see for miles. Nothing but forest and rock. No roads, no rooftops, nothing. I felt good, for the first time in weeks, like I could finally breathe again. I spent the rest of the day reading, poking at the fire, and just walking around nearby. I didn't see any signs of people. No tire tracks, no litter, no old fire pits. It was like nobody had been there in years. That evening, I noticed something weird. I was collecting dry wood a few hundred feet from my camp when I saw footprints. At first, I thought they were mine, but I checked. The tread was different. Mine had thick lines with a broken heel. These were circular, like hiking boots, but narrower, smaller, almost like a kid's. I followed them a little. They came from deeper in the woods and passed close to where I had set up camp. But they didn't circle it, just passed by, maybe 30 or 40 feet from my tent, and then disappeared into the underbrush again. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. Could have been a hunter, could have been there for days. I didn't hear anything the night before. Still, it made me uneasy. I kept checking over my shoulder on the way back to camp. The woods felt quieter. That night, the air got colder. I huddled deeper into my sleeping bag. I didn't drink. I wanted to be alert. Around midnight, I heard something crunch, not like a tree creaking or an animal stepping lightly. This was steady, heavy. I stayed still and listened. It stopped. Then I heard it again. Something walking, 2 legs, not a deer. I stayed silent. My heart was racing. The sound stopped just outside the tent. I didn't have a gun, just a hatchet I kept by the side of my bag. I gripped it tightly. For a long time, nothing happened. No movement, no sounds. I finally worked up the nerve to unzip the tent a little, just enough to peek out. There was no one there. The fire had burned low, just glowing coals. The woods were dead silent. I sat awake the rest of the night. Every crack of a twig made my skin crawl. I kept expecting someone to shine a flashlight or speak or try to open the tent. But nothing happened. In the morning, I found more footprints. This time, they were closer to the tent. Whoever it was had walked up behind it and stopped. I found flattened grass. My gear was untouched. Nothing stolen or moved. But they'd been there, watching. I decided to pack up and leave. This wasn't some animal. This was a person. Someone creeping around my campsite at night, not saying a word. I didn't want to know what they wanted. As I packed, I kept looking into the woods, expecting to see movement. But nothing. The sun was up. Birds were chirping again. Everything looked normal, but it felt wrong. I hiked back to the SUV and loaded my stuff in fast. The drive out felt even longer. Every branch that snapped under my tires made me jump. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone running behind me. About a mile before I hit the main road, I had to stop. A tree had fallen across the trail. It wasn't there on the way in. It wasn't a huge tree, but big enough to block the way. I got out, heart pounding, and checked it. It wasn't old. The brake looked fresh, bark peeled, clean splintered wood, like it had been pushed or cut, not just fallen from wind. I didn't have a chainsaw, but I had a folding saw and my hatchet. I started working on it fast. I just wanted out. The noise of chopping echoed too much. I kept glancing around, expecting someone to step out of the trees. After half an hour, I cleared enough of the trunk to squeeze the SUV past. I jumped in and drove without stopping. When I finally got to the highway, I pulled over and sat for a while. I kept the doors locked. I looked at my phone. Still no signal. I drove until I hit a small town. Bought gas. Got coffee. Called a friend just to hear someone's voice. I don't know who was out there. Maybe just a hiker messing around. Maybe someone living off the grid. But they watched me. They came to my tent. They waited until night, didn't speak, didn't take anything. I keep thinking about the way the footprints circled closer each night. Like they were waiting for something, or deciding something. I haven't gone camping since. I want to, but not alone. Not ever again. I still think about the firelight on the trees and the slow, steady steps in the dark. And I think about how close I came to never coming back. That quiet, cold clearing in the woods still shows up in my dreams. Only in the dreams, I never hear the footsteps. I just wake up and the tent is already unzipped. I went camping alone last fall in the White River National Forest in Colorado. I had some time off work, and I wanted a break from everything. No phones, no people, just peace. I had done plenty of solo hikes and overnights, but this would be my longest solo trip. My plan was to spend 4 nights deep in the forest, off any main trail, with just the basics in my pack. The first day went fine. I parked at a small, unmarked pull-off I had seen on a past trip and took an overgrown trail that split off from the main one. I hiked for hours, going further than usual, crossing 2 small creeks, and then cutting into the trees toward a spot I had marked on a printed map, an old logging clearing with a small rise on one side and thick pine all around. No one would be anywhere near me. I set up my tent, filtered water, ate, and sat watching the light fade. The first night was calm. The forest went completely dark, with no moon, and I lay there in my sleeping bag, listening to the occasional rustle of animals in the distance. I didn't sleep great, but that's normal on the first night. The next day, I did some exploring, marked a few spots on my map, and checked my bearings. Around mid-afternoon, I noticed faint tracks in a muddy patch near the creek. They looked recent, too big for a deer. I crouched down and realized they looked like boot prints. That wasn't completely surprising. Hunters or other campers could be out here. But these prints weren't on any trail and they looked fresh, maybe a day old. It made me a little uneasy, knowing someone else had been out here off trail. That night, I was more alert. I kept waking up, thinking I heard things. At one point, I heard what sounded like someone walking slowly through the woods. I held my breath and listened. It was faint, distant, but it wasn't a four-legged animal. It had a slow, steady cadence, like footsteps. They stopped after a few minutes, and I didn't hear anything else. The next morning, I checked around my campsite but didn't see anything odd. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. I debated hiking back out early, but I told myself it was probably my imagination. I had brought extra food and was prepared for bad weather. I didn't want to turn back just because I got spooked. I moved camp that day, further up the hill into a thicker grove of pine. Took a while to find flat ground, but I thought it would be more hidden. I cleared a small area, set up again, and made dinner early. I tried to calm myself, telling myself I'd done this before. I'd seen bear tracks and even heard mountain lions in the distance on other trips. But this didn't feel the same. This wasn't just nature making me nervous. That night, I heard the walking again. This time, it came from the direction of my old camp. It was louder, still slow, like someone trying to stay quiet. It circled. I stayed completely still.
No flashlight.
Just listening. The steps got closer, then paused. Then nothing for maybe 20 minutes. Then one quick step again. I was sure it was a person. I gripped my knife inside the sleeping bag. Eventually, the sounds faded. In the morning, I found a broken twig right outside the cleared area, where the brush started. That twig hadn't been broken before. Something or someone had gotten very close. I started to get ready to leave, but the weather turned. Clouds rolled in quick. Started raining and the wind picked up. I didn't want to pack up in that and hike miles out through mud and slick rock. I waited it out through the afternoon. The wind made it hard to hear anything, which made me even more anxious. I kept checking around the tent, kept thinking I saw movement in the woods. That night was the worst. The wind died down late and I finally started to relax. But not long after I laid down, I heard it again. Footsteps, but not circling this time. Coming straight toward me. I didn't breathe. I stayed still. I could hear the leaves crunching. Then they stopped. I sat up slowly and waited. My tent was zipped. I had my knife again. Then I saw the silhouette. A shape just outside the tent. Standing still. I didn't move. I waited for the shape to move, to say something, to do anything. Didn't. It stood there. I don't know for how long. Then it turned and walked away. No light, no noise except the steps. I packed before the sun came up, threw everything into my pack. Didn't eat, didn't filter water. I just got out. I bushwhacked most of the way, not even following my marked route. I was sure whoever that was might be trying to follow me. I made it back to the car by late afternoon, soaked and scraped up from running through branches and thorns. I drove until I found a gas station and parked under the lights. Only then did I finally eat something. I didn't report anything. I didn't call anyone. I still don't know if I was being followed, or if someone was messing with me, or if it was just bad timing with someone else out there. But I won't camp alone like that again. Not off trail. Not that deep. What scared me most wasn't what I saw. It was how quiet they were. How they didn't say anything. How they came back night after night.
No campsite.
No fire. Just walking. Just watching. I can handle animals. I can handle storms. But I don't know how to handle that. Since then, I stick to marked trails and campgrounds. I still hike. Still love the forest. But I don't go deep alone anymore. I've learned that the scariest thing in the woods isn't a bear or a cougar. It's the person you don't hear coming. The one who stands still outside your tent in the dark and does nothing at all. I don't really go camping much anymore. Not after what happened 2 summers ago. I used to enjoy the whole thing, the quiet, the crackling fire, the way the forest just swallowed up all the noise of the world. It was peaceful, a break from everything. I didn't go for the challenge or to prove anything. I just liked the quiet. That summer, I decided to take a week off work and camp alone. I didn't have many friends into camping, and I liked the idea of being completely on my own. I picked a spot deep in the Ouachita Mountains in Arkansas. It wasn't a popular site, just a stretch of open forest near a small river that I had stumbled upon a couple years back during a hike. No marked trails nearby, no campground amenities. Just me, the trees, and the dirt. I parked my car off an old forest road and hiked about 4 miles into the woods, using my GPS to keep my bearings. I brought enough supplies for a week: freeze-dried food, water filter, tent, sleeping bag, a fire starter kit, and a small hatchet. I also had my phone, even though I knew I wouldn't get service out there. The first few days were calm. I fished a little in the river, cooked by the fire, and read books I downloaded ahead of time. I slept early and woke with the sun. There were some distant animal sounds at night, but that was normal. It was the kind of stuff that's supposed to happen in the woods. On the 4th day, I decided to follow the river upstream. I didn't have a plan. I just wanted to stretch my legs and maybe find a good spot to swim. The banks got rockier as I went, and after about 2 hours, I found a bend where the river widened out into a deeper pool. The water was clear and cold. I stripped down and swam for a bit before lying out on a sun-warmed rock. I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes, the sun had moved a lot farther across the sky. I checked my watch and saw that it was nearly 5 in the evening. I got dressed and started heading back, but something felt off. It wasn't a sound or a sight, just something in my gut. The woods looked different. I followed the river, but I wasn't seeing anything familiar. At first, I thought I'd just taken a slightly different path. I kept going, but after another hour, I hadn't seen anything I recognized. I should have been back at camp. My GPS wasn't much help. It kept jumping or pointing me in slightly wrong directions. Maybe the tree cover was interfering. Maybe it was just old. Eventually, I found my camp again, but it was nearly dark by the time I got there, and I was rattled. I'd never felt disoriented like that before. I got the fire going, ate a quick dinner, and crawled into my tent. I didn't sleep well. Every little rustle outside felt sharper, like it was closer. I kept my hatchet near my sleeping bag. The next morning, I woke up to something strange. Around the edges of my campsite, I found marks in the dirt. Not footprints exactly, just deep scrapes. Lines that looked like someone had dragged something heavy across the ground. There were at least a dozen of them, all going different directions. None led directly to my tent, but they circled close. I stood there staring at the marks for a while, trying to figure out what could have made them. They weren't made by animals I knew. Not deer, not bears. They looked like they'd been made deliberately, like someone had walked through dragging sticks in each hand. That whole day I stayed near camp. I didn't want to wander again. I didn't even leave to fish. I just sharpened sticks, tidied up the fire pit, and kept an eye on the woods. I tried to write it off. Maybe I'd made the marks myself without realizing. Maybe wind had dragged branches weirdly. But none of those things made much sense. The scrapes were too clean, too purposeful. That night was worse. I barely slept. I kept hearing movement outside. Not close, but near enough to keep me on edge. A couple times I sat up and just listened. The woods weren't silent, but there was a rhythm to the noise. Chirping bugs, rustling leaves, and every so often, that rhythm broke. A branch snapped too hard. Leaves crunched too long. In the morning, I found something else. A bundle of sticks tied together with what looked like twine. It was leaning against a tree near my fire pit. I hadn't put it there. I don't even carry twine. The bundle wasn't big, maybe 2 feet long, shaped like a triangle. I didn't touch it. I didn't even want to get near it. I took a long look at it and then packed my gear. I planned to stay 2 more nights, but I wasn't going to risk it. Something wasn't right. I stuffed my things into my pack, put out the fire, and started hiking back to the car. It was only 4 miles. I could make that easy. But again, the woods didn't cooperate. I followed the GPS, kept the sun to my right, did everything I was supposed to. But after a couple of hours, I was still in deep woods. No sign of the road, no tire tracks, no familiar bends in the trail, and my GPS had stopped updating altogether. I had full battery, but the signal bar was blank. I kept walking. My pack felt heavier than it should have. I rationed water, tried to stay calm. Around late afternoon, I came across a clearing. At first, I thought it was man-made. It was too open. The trees didn't fall naturally in such a wide circle. Then I saw more bundles of sticks. Not one, dozens. Some tied into triangles, others into crosses or squares. They were all around the clearing, leaned up against trees or hanging from branches. I backed out slowly and moved in a different direction. I didn't care if it took longer to get to the road. I wasn't walking through that place. That night, I had no choice but to set up camp again. I picked a spot near a rocky outcrop and lit a fire with the last of my dry kindling. I didn't eat much. My stomach was in knots. I barely slept. I heard movement again. This time it was closer. Definite footsteps. Heavy ones. More than one set. I stayed still. I gripped the hatchet and didn't breathe. The steps stopped just outside the fire's glow. I could see the faint shape of something, someone, but they didn't move closer. After what felt like hours, the footsteps retreated. When I woke up at dawn, I packed everything in record time. I didn't care if I left things behind. I just needed to move. I picked a direction I hadn't tried before and started walking. The sun was rising behind me, so I aimed west. I kept moving, only stopping to sip water. My legs were sore. My mind felt numb. By late afternoon, I found a dirt road. Not the one I'd driven in on, but a road. A tire track road, which meant people. I followed it west until I saw an old wooden sign. Barely readable, but it said something about a fire service road. I hiked another hour before I got a signal on my phone. I called a ranger station and told them where I thought I was. They sent someone. When I got back to my car, it had been moved about 20 feet off the road. The ranger said it looked like someone had tried to hide it from view. I didn't report anything else. I didn't talk about the bundles or the sounds. I just said I got lost, that I was stupid for going alone. The ranger seemed to believe it. Since then, I haven't been camping again. I still think about it a lot, though. About what I saw or almost saw. About those footsteps. About the car being moved. I don't know who or what was out there, but it wasn't an animal. It wasn't a ghost either. It was people. People who didn't want me there. People who watched me. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't left early. If I hadn't found that road. I don't let my mind go too far down that line of thought. I got lucky. That's the only reason I'm still here. So no, I don't camp anymore. I don't go into deep woods alone. And I sure as hell don't trust that I'll always find my way back. It started as something I just wanted to try once. I'd always gone camping with friends or family, but that summer, everyone was busy. I had just quit my job, and I figured I'd take some time to clear my head. I didn't have kids or a girlfriend, so I didn't have to explain anything to anyone. I wanted to get away from town, from people, from everything. I'd read about a spot deep in the national forest, several miles past where most people camp. It wasn't on the official park website, but I found a thread about it on a hiking forum. People called it the trail nobody uses. One guy mentioned the spot was quiet and remote with no crowds and no cell signal, and that was all I needed to hear. I packed light but smart tent, tarp, camp stove, food for 5 days, water purifier, flashlight, knife, bear spray, first aid kit, and my boots. I double-checked the weather. 5 straight days of sunshine. Looked perfect. I left early on a Monday morning to avoid weekend campers and drove 4 hours into the forest. The last half hour was just gravel and potholes, and I was the only car in the dirt parking area when I got there. The trailhead didn't have much signage, just a wooden post with a faded name. No official map, no visitor log, nothing. It didn't even look like a real trail, just a narrow dirt path through the trees with grass pushing in from both sides. I hiked for nearly 4 hours. There was nobody out there. No voices, no footsteps, not even the sound of cars or planes overhead. Just wind, leaves, and the occasional squirrel darting through brush. It was quiet in a way I hadn't felt in years. The place I picked to camp wasn't anything special. There wasn't a lake or a view. It was just a small clearing, maybe 20 feet across, surrounded by thick pines and uneven ground. What I liked about it was how hidden it felt. No chance of someone stumbling onto my camp. I set up the tent near a dead log and used the log as a bench. I made a little fire pit, collected wood, and got the fire going before sunset. I ate a simple meal, watched the sky go orange and then dark, and sat listening to the woods. That night I fell asleep with a strange mix of calm and alertness. Like I knew I was totally alone but still couldn't shake the thought that someone, or something, was out there watching. The first night passed without any trouble. I woke up just before sunrise to birds chirping and sunlight leaking through the mesh ceiling of my tent. I had oatmeal, made coffee, then hiked a bit more down the trail, not taking my full pack, just water, snacks, and a knife. I marked the trees with ribbon so I wouldn't get lost and made it maybe another hour deeper before the trail faded to almost nothing. Fallen branches, leaves, and moss made the path hard to follow. I had to backtrack once after realizing I was going the wrong way. The air felt heavier the deeper I went. Not hot, but still thick and still. I didn't see any animals, not even a rabbit or deer, just trees and silence. After a while, I headed back and got to camp in time to cook again before dark. That second night, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was just how quiet it got after the sun went down. I sat on the log by the fire for a while but couldn't enjoy it. I kept thinking I was hearing something faint, twigs snapping or leaves rustling, but every time I turned, there was nothing. I finally crawled into the tent and zipped it up, hoping I was just being paranoid. I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up and listening for sounds. Around 2 a.m., I heard a sharp snap, like a thick branch breaking. It wasn't close, maybe 30 or 40 feet away, but it was loud. I held my breath and listened. Nothing else. No footsteps, no voices, just that one crack. I stayed awake for another hour, clutching the bear spray and flashlight, then eventually passed out from exhaustion. The next morning, I found something weird. One of my boot laces was untied. That might not sound like much, but I knew I had double knotted them before going to bed. I always did, especially out here, and I had left them outside the tent flap, not inside. They were just sitting there with one boot laid on its side like it had been moved. No signs of animal tracks. The dirt was packed, and I didn't see anything else strange, but still, I felt like someone had touched my stuff. I told myself it was probably just me. Maybe I forgot I'd left them like that. That day, I didn't hike much. I stayed near camp, keeping busy by gathering more firewood and boiling some water to clean gear. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I kept glancing into the woods every few minutes, expecting to see something or someone standing between the trees. But it was always just shadows and branches. That night, I didn't light a fire. I didn't want to attract attention. I ate cold food and climbed into the tent while it was still light out. I left the zipper half open so I could peek out. I lay there, listening, holding the flashlight in one hand and the bear spray in the other. Around midnight, I heard something. Not far this time. A low sound, almost like breathing. Not heavy or fast, just steady and soft. Then a rustle, then quiet, then another faint movement in the leaves. I stayed frozen. Every part of me screamed to turn the flashlight on, but I didn't. I thought maybe if I stayed still and quiet, whatever it was would go away. The breathing sound lasted maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. Then total silence. I didn't sleep at all. In the morning, I walked the area around the tent. About 20 feet away, I found something that chilled me to my core. A partial footprint in the dirt. Not a full one, just a partial heel and part of the ball of the foot.
Nos chutred.
It looked barefoot. Too wide to be mine. Too clean to be old. I stared at it for a long time, then packed my things fast. I should have hiked out then and there. I knew something was off, but part of me didn't want to admit I was scared. I told myself maybe it was an old print. Maybe I was reading too much into it. I told myself I'd stay one more night, just one. I told myself I'd keep the knife under my sleeping bag this time, and I'd block the tent zipper with my pack. That was a mistake. That afternoon, I tried to keep busy again. I walked the perimeter around my camp, checking trees, looking for more signs, but I didn't find anything. The rest of the day passed slow. I skipped dinner again and stayed inside the tent from sunset onward. This time I stayed fully dressed, boots and all, knife in one hand, bear spray in the other. It was around 1 a.m. when I heard it again, this time much closer. Footsteps. Actual, slow, deliberate footsteps moving through the leaves around my tent. No flashlight beam, no talking, just walking. Then they stopped. Then a long silence. Then I heard the zipper on my tent jiggle. Just a tiny movement, like someone trying to pull it an inch or two. Slowly. I shot up, pushed my bag hard against the zipper from inside, and gripped the knife so tight my hand hurt. I didn't yell. I didn't move. I just waited. The zipper didn't move again. I couldn't hear footsteps anymore either. Just the wind. I stayed like that until dawn. When it was light enough to see, I packed everything in minutes. I didn't care if I left stuff behind. I just grabbed what I needed and started hiking. I didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't rest. I just kept moving, checking behind me constantly. I made it back to my car in under 3 hours, way faster than it took to get in. My legs were shaking. I tossed everything into the trunk and drove without stopping until I got to a gas station back in town. I looked like hell. I hadn't shaved, hadn't eaten real food, hadn't slept properly in days. The guy behind the counter asked if I was okay, but I just nodded, bought water, and left. That was 2 years ago. I've camped since then, but never alone, never off trail, and never without checking who's nearby. The weirdest part? A week after I got back, I went back to that hiking forum to see if anyone else had written about that area. The thread was gone. No archive, no old posts. It was like nobody had ever mentioned the place at all. I've thought about going back just to see if the trail is even still there, but I know I won't, because whoever was out there with me, they weren't passing through. They lived there, and I was the one who didn't belong. I went on a solo camping trip in late September. I was 32 at the time, recently single, and I needed to clear my head. I had just gone through a messy breakup, and everything about my life in the city had started to feel loud and exhausting. I'd been working long hours, barely sleeping, and one day, I just grabbed my gear, filled my pack, and drove out of town. I didn't tell many people where I was going, just that I'd be camping alone for a few days, maybe a week. I turned off my phone once I got near the trailhead. The place I chose was a state forest in northern Idaho. It wasn't popular, which is why I picked it. No RVs, no family groups, no screaming kids. The trail system there wasn't very developed, and the campsites were primitive, no water spigots, no fire pits, no cell service. Just thick woods and a few dirt paths leading deeper into the trees. I parked my car at the trailhead lot, double-checked that I had everything, then started hiking. I planned to follow an old logging trail for a few miles before heading off-trail to a spot I'd seen on satellite maps. It looked promising, set on a ridge above a stream, with a flat area for my tent and trees spaced just right for a tarp and bear bag. The hike took about 5 hours total. I followed the logging road for most of it, then bushwhacked through thick brush and uneven terrain until I reached the ridge. It was beautiful, quiet, shaded, and completely isolated. I didn't see a single person on the way in. I set up my tent facing east, so I'd wake up with the sun. I rigged my tarp between 2 trees and hung my food about 50 yards away. That night, I sat by a small campfire, sipping instant coffee from my metal cup, just listening to the sounds of the forest. Wind moving through pine needles, distant rustles from small animals, a hawk somewhere far off. I hadn't felt so relaxed in months. The first night passed without anything strange. I woke up sore from the hike, but rested. I made oatmeal, boiled more coffee, then spent the day walking the area, exploring small animal trails and taking mental notes of anything unusual. I marked a few trees with ribbon so I wouldn't get turned around. Everything felt safe, peaceful. The only real issue was how quiet it got. So quiet you could hear your own breathing. Even the birds went silent by late afternoon. On the second night, something changed. I turned in early, maybe around 9, and I just started to drift off when I heard something outside. It wasn't an animal. Not the usual crackling of branches or rustle of leaves. This sounded deliberate, like footsteps, slow, heavy ones. They moved past my tent, maybe 10 or 15 feet away. I held my breath, listening. They stopped. I stayed frozen, not moving, heart pounding in my ears. I didn't hear anything for what felt like minutes. Then the steps started again, moving away this time, but just as slow. Crunch, crunch, pause. I eventually fell asleep out of sheer exhaustion, but when I woke up, I felt uneasy. I told myself it was probably just a deer or moose, maybe even a bear. They can move pretty quietly when they want to, but bears don't usually linger like that, and they definitely don't move in a perfect circle around your camp. The next day I considered hiking out, but I felt stupid about it. I'd been looking forward to this trip for weeks. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination or a trick of sound. I forced myself to stay. I didn't leave camp that day, just stayed near the tent, reading and tending the fire. I kept my knife on me. My bear spray was clipped to my hip. I didn't see or hear anything all day. That night, the steps came back, but this time they came closer. It was around 11 p.m. I hadn't been able to fall asleep. The wind had died, and the air felt too still. I lay there listening. Then I heard the crunching again. Same slow rhythm, same deliberate pacing. It was coming from behind the tent this time. I held my breath. Then it stopped again. But this time it didn't move away. It just stayed there. I could hear the weight shifting. I could hear the tiniest crunch of dry pine needles. It was maybe 5 feet from my tent. I reached for my headlamp and turned it on, but I didn't unzip the tent. I didn't want to give away that I was awake. I stayed like that for over an hour, not moving. Then I heard it walk away. Same direction, same slow pace. I barely slept. At dawn, I got up, grabbed my knife, and walked the perimeter of my camp. There weren't any clear tracks, just faint impressions in the pine needles. Could have been an animal, but something about the spacing felt wrong. They were too far apart for a deer, too narrow for a moose, and they formed a perfect line around my camp. A full circle. I told myself I'd leave that day, but I kept waiting, kept telling myself I was being paranoid. Around noon, I thought maybe I should stay just one more night, just to prove to myself it was all in my head. I regretted that decision later. I didn't eat dinner that night. I didn't want to hang food and deal with walking out to the trees. I just sat by the fire until it got dark, then packed everything inside the tent and got ready to leave at first light. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat upright in my sleeping bag, fully dressed, knife in hand, headlamp around my neck. I turned off all the lights and waited. It didn't take long. The footsteps came back, but this time they didn't circle the camp. They came directly toward the tent. I could hear the pine needles being crushed, slow and steady. Then silence. I sat frozen. I didn't breathe. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat. Then I heard something touch the tent. Just the lightest press, like fingers brushing the fabric. I snapped on my headlamp and hit the side of the tent with my fist. Whatever was out there bolted. I heard it crashing through the brush, running fast. It didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. Too heavy, too loud, and it ran on 2 legs. I didn't wait until morning. I tore down the tent in the dark, shoved everything in my pack, and hiked out with nothing but the headlamp. I followed my trail markers, heart racing the entire time. I didn't stop once. It took me almost 7 hours to reach the car. By the time I got there, the sun was up. I looked back at the tree line before getting in. I didn't see anything, but I felt watched. I drove straight back to the city. I didn't stop. I didn't eat. I didn't answer my phone until the next day. I never went back to that forest again. I didn't report it. Who would I tell? What would I say? Someone followed me into the woods? Someone circled my tent at night for 2 days? There were no injuries, no crimes, nothing that could be proven. Just fear and footprints in pine needles. But something was out there, something that didn't want me there. I haven't camped alone since. I still hike, but I stay on popular trails now. I make sure there are always people nearby. I carry more gear than I used to. A GPS, a satellite phone, 2 knives, extra lights. And I never, ever ignore my gut anymore. That trip taught me something important. There are people out there who live in the spaces we forget about. The deep woods, the old trails, the places with no cell service and no rangers. And sometimes they don't want to be found. And if you do find them, don't stay another night.